Good morning, everybody. My name is Marty Mascari. I'm a contractor with the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging and the North Central Texas Aging and Disability Resource Center, or ADRC. The ADRC is a project of under the North Central Texas Area Agency on Aging. We're blessed here today to have Lisa Scruggs with Adult Protective Services to talk about Adult Protective Services working for you. And before we get started, I'm going to first talk about the continuing education units for those of you that might be joining us looking for those. If we could advance the slide one, and then I'll go over this real quick, and we'll go over this once again at the end of the presentation today. But for those of you that are joining us for CEU credits, we're offering CEUs for licensed social workers and licensed professional counselors in Texas. Now, I've had people within Texas get their certificates and use them for other licenses. I've had people outside of Texas get them and use them in their jurisdictions, but there's no guarantee for those. Just so you know, we are set up in Texas for licensed social workers and licensed professional counselors. You are welcome to get a certificate if you'd like to submit it to whatever your jurisdiction is for your licensing. We're also offering a certificate of attendance for those of you that just need a certificate of attendance. The requirements are the same for both. We're offering them for one classroom hour of CEUs. You must complete the entire webinar to be eligible. You can't miss more than about 5 or 10 minutes of the webinar to be eligible for either of these. You must complete the Google survey. The Google survey should pop up as you're closing out of Zoom today, but I realize some companies have pop-up blockers that block those. I'll also be sending out that survey link in the follow-up email with the link to the slides from today as well. The Google evaluation will be available to you for 1 week until the 9th. And after that time, we'll start sending the certificates out. We should have them out by the 16th. We've had a little bit of technical issues over the last couple of weeks. We're a little bit behind, but I think we're just about caught up now. And we fixed those over the weekend. So you should have those by the 16th. And if you don't, you're more than welcome to reach out to me and check on what's going on with that. That would be great. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa and let her talk to us about Adult Protective Services.
Well, good morning. And Marty, thank you for inviting me to present on Adult Protective Services for this group. Again, my name is Lisa Scruggs, and I am the faith-based and community engagement specialist for Adult Protective Services. And the particular area that we cover is Region 3, which covers 19 counties in the state of Texas. And I want to start off by talking about the mission. I did notice that we do have some outside of the state of Texas. So again, this presentation is targeted for Texas Adult Protective Services because pretty much every state has their own program and how they function. So this is again going to relate to the state of Texas. Now, the mission of our agency is to protect older adults and individuals with disabilities from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. And our vision is to protect with purpose, passion, and persistence. As most of y'all know, that every year an estimated 5 million, or about 1 in 10, older Americans are victims of elder abuse. And that's only part of the picture. Our experts, I am so sorry. That'll pass in about 2 minutes or 2 seconds. The experts believe that for every case of elder abuse that's reported, as many as 23 go unreported. And elder abuse is sometimes defined as the most underreported type of abuse that we see in our communities. In the population growth that we're seeing, in 2010, just the population, the adults with disabilities, those that are under the age of 65, were about 1,592,000. And at this point, we're looking at 1,851,000. And then adults 65 and over, 2,627,000 to current 4 million. So as we can see, our population is just doubling in size. And of course, it is my hope that not just for the state of Texas, but everybody starts focusing on taking care of our aging population, because we are going to be the most prevalent population by 2040. In fiscal year 2021, the Texas APS in-home investigations received 118,200 intake reports. And those are the number of reports that come in from anybody reporting their suspicion or report of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We confirmed, meaning that we validated those reports, 50,934 cases in 2021, and 13,951 of those cases that were reported were by community agencies. In 2021, Region 3, which I mentioned earlier, which covers 19 counties, we received a total of 2,728 reports last year. To make a report, we have two options. One is by calling our Texas Abuse Hotline, or you can file a report via the internet. Now, we do on our website do ask that if this particular report could be suspected as a priority 1, which is, I'm going to go into more detail about that, then we do ask that you make that report via phone call as opposed to doing it online. And a priority 1 basically states that that person is in immediate risk of death, severe harm or death. Some information as a reporter, we will ask about your name, the name of the victim, alleged victim as well, their date of birth, current address, a brief description of the situation, and details about the alleged perpetrator, if there is even a perpetrator. We do find that a lot of our alleged victims are their own perpetrators when we're looking at self-neglect or self-medical neglect. We do want to know of any current injuries or medical conditions that we need to be aware of, and names and phone numbers of any relatives, neighbors, or friends that may have knowledge of the situation. If you don't have that, of course, that's fine. But if you do have that available, because we do try to include all people that are involved with the alleged victim during our investigation, and reporters should provide all the appropriate contact information for themselves. Now, what gives us the authority to do what we do? That's Chapter 48 of the Health and Human Services Resource Code. And this does allow us and mandates investigations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. It does require reporting, and it provides immunity for the reporter or anybody cooperating with the investigation. Of course, it provides confidentiality and protection for the reporter, and it does provide our investigators access to all records. And when we say that, what we're talking about are things like medical records, bank records, whatever we need to conduct a thorough investigation of the actual allegations. People reported to be abused, neglected, or exploited is for those that are 65 and over, and this is the basic eligibility requirement for us to pursue the investigation once the report is made. And those are 65 and over, or an adult ages 18 through 64 that has a substantial disability. And when we talk about a substantial disability, we're talking about an impairment that grossly and chronically diminishes that individual's ability to live independently or provide their own self-care, which can be determined through observation, possible medical diagnosis, evaluation, or assessment. And the reason we put this definition or added this definition, and I guess it's been about I think 8 years that we added this was because in the state of Texas, a lot of times the definition of disabled is a legal definition that comes through the Social Security Administration. So that is not an end-all be-all for us to define disability. We will investigate anybody, whether they have a, quote, declared disability through the Social Security Administration, if that they're unable to live independently and provide their own self-care. Now, we do also require that the disability be long-lasting and have a considerable inability to live independently or provide their own self-care. When we talk about the inability to live independently or provide their own self-care, what we're looking at is, does this individual have a limitation such as shopping, maybe the ability to make sound decisions, housekeeping, cooking or preparing food, preventing harm to self or others, completing personal hygiene, and this is basically anybody that is unable to complete their own ADLs. Let's talk about the actual investigation and the types of alleged perpetrators. What do we investigate? We investigate abuse, which can be physical, sexual, verbal, or emotional, financial exploitation, or neglect, which can be physical, medical, or even mental health neglect. The investigative process for us is, number one, it starts, of course, at the actual report. Once you make a report, a priority is assigned based on the information that we receive. And that would be a priority 1, 2, 3, or 4. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And once that intake is received and the priority assignment or the priority is assigned, then the case initiation begins within 24 hours of the period that you make the report. The case initiation is done by telephone, and that initiation is made with a call to the reporter and to the alleged victim. Now, once we initiate the case, the priority does determine the amount of time we are required to be out in the actual home and conduct a face-to-face with the alleged victim. If it's a priority 1, we have 24 hours to conduct our home assessment, and that would be somebody that is at immediate risk of death, severe injury or risk of death, and the caseworker has 24 hours to get out to the home. If it's a priority 2, that would be a report in which the individual is at risk for harm or injury. And the investigator has 3 days to conduct the face-to-face. If it's a priority 3, that would be for any other report in which the person's situation could put them at risk. And that would be a 7-day time frame in which to conduct the face-to-face. And then priority 4 would be our exploitation cases, except if the exploitation report and there is substantial information and evidence that that person could be immediately impoverished, then the caseworker has 14 days. And during that face-to-face, that's when we actually interview the alleged victim, all the collaterals, and the alleged perpetrator. During that assessment, that's just where we gather all of our evidence to determine the validity of the case, whether services are going to be needed, what we need to do as an agency to intervene to eliminate the immediate crisis, and then we conclude the investigation. Who we investigate as alleged perpetrators, that would be a paid caretaker, somebody who is a employed employee of any primary home care HHSC agency, also an unpaid caretaker or any family members. And we define the alleged perpetrator of is anybody who has an ongoing relationship with the alleged victim. This is a key component because APS does not investigate like stranger reports of, scams, a one-time crime, that's law enforcement. If it's a scam or, sweetheart scam, anything like that, that needs to be reported to law enforcement and the Attorney General. I'm pausing here for a minute. I'm looking at some of these Q&As. Okay, I'm going to address those as when we finish up here. I see good questions, questions that we normally get, and I'll get back to that in a minute. Okay, when we're talking about the characteristics of a caretaker, this would be what we're looking at is, do they prevent the alleged victim from speaking or seeing visitors? Is there anger or indifference, possibly aggressive behavior toward the alleged victim? Is there a history of substance abuse, possible mental illness, criminal behavior, or family violence? Lack of affection toward the alleged victim, maybe flirtation or coyness as a possible indicator of inappropriate sexual relationships, conflicting accounts of incidents, and talks of the alleged victim as a burden. Why am I not moving forward? Okay. And why our alleged perpetrators prey on people? Some of the reasons could be that, of course, when you're dealing with a vulnerable population, they are trusting individual and usually lonely. They're many times isolated, have a cognitive impairment, often have a stable retirement income along with savings, or our alleged victims are vulnerable and often dependent on others for care. And that's just a basic, again, a characteristic of this isn't end all be all, but that is some of the descriptions. Okay, let me back up. Marty, I'm having some, let me go back.
Yeah, sometimes the only thing that might help is to unshare and reshare.
Okay, it's moving now.
Okay.
So let's talk about the actual services and the client rights. APS will furnish protective services to a person who's 65 or older or is an adult with a disability. With this two criteria, number one, we have to be able to have the person's consent to proceed. And if the alleged victim does not provide consent, then we have to determine whether that person lacks the capacity to consent. So I did see one of those questions about why, that they made a report and were never contacted. It could be, number one, that the report was, it didn't meet the criteria. I will say that policy states that the reporters must always be contacted on the outcome of the case. We're not going to reveal any, pertinent or private information, but they are to be notified if we investigate or if we don't. Now, if the person does not provide the consent and they do have capacity, they have the right to refuse our services. And so we have to close the case at that point. Now, if the person is not consenting for the APS investigation and we question that individual's capacity, then we will request a capacity assessment for that individual. When we're talking about the capacity to consent, that means that a person lacks the capacity to consent to receive protective services if, because of a mental or physical impairment, and the person is incapable of understanding the nature of the services offered and agreeing to receive or rejecting protective services. Now I'm frozen again here. They have the right to cooperate with the investigation. They have the right to refuse protective services as long as they have the capacity to consent. They have the right to participate in service planning, meaning that once we've concluded our investigation and we deem that there is a need to provide ongoing services in the home or for the individual to prevent further maltreatment, they have the right to assist with that service plan. They have the right to the least restrictive alternative, and they have the right to refuse any medical treatment based on their religious beliefs, regardless of capacity. And they have the right to a court-appointed attorney ad litem. And this means that if we have to pursue an emergency order of protection, then they will be appointed attorney ad litem. When we're looking at actual service delivery, in Texas, Adult Protective Services does receive every legislative session amount of funding to provide services, but these services are based on addressing the immediate need. It is not for ongoing type services. We are not a service providing agency per se. During our investigation, if we do determine there is a need for ongoing services to keep that client safe, then we are very dependent on our community and governmental agencies to assist for those ongoing needs. We're also going to look if we can receive assistance from the family, friends, or neighbors that are willing to help. They don't have to help, but we will seek those out. APS direct provisions and purchase client services. That is the money that I was talking about that we are awarded as an agency. We may have to look at possible placement outside of the home if we cannot assure the safety of that individual in their current living environment. If necessary, we will take legal interventions, and that's what I was talking about, taking protective custody of the alleged victim. And that is not something that we do alone. It does have to go through the courts. They will make the final decision whether they approve of our request to take legal intervention for that individual. And of course, guardianship. Now, we don't actually determine guardianship. That is sent over and referred under the Health and Human Services Commission. Some of the indicators of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. We are bound by these definitions when we are investigating these allegations. And what we're looking at for physical abuse, and it does apply to all alleged perpetrators except for a paid caretaker. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because we do hold our paid caretakers to a higher standard when there is allegations for them as a perpetrator. And what we're looking at, is there any knowing, reckless, or intentional act, or the failure to act, including unreasonable confinement, corporal punishment, inappropriate or excessive force, or intimidation, which caused physical injury, death, or emotional harm. What applies to the paid caretaker is the same definition, but it caused or may have caused. So when we receive a report on a paid caretaker, there could be a potential cause for injury. Whereas if it's just a regular caretaker who does not receive monetary compensation, that definition does apply, that there has to have been actual physical injury, death, or emotional harm. I do want to expand a little bit on the paid caretaker. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with the EMR registry. That's the Employee Misconduct Registry. If we validate on a perpetrator and they are a paid caretaker, we do submit their name to the Employee Misconduct Registry. And of course, this is available to the public. It is available to family members who want to hire privately a caregiver, and it is required by home health agencies to use the employee misconduct registry when they are hiring. And unfortunately, if that individual does get placed on the employee misconduct registry, they are no longer allowed in the state of Texas to work in that role or be a provider for a person who meets the definition of aged and or disabled. Continuing on definitions of physical abuse, it could fall under the category of corporal punishment, which could be hitting, slapping, beating, pushing, or inappropriate or excessive force, meaning that the alleged victim has been pushed or shoved, not being bathed or changed when necessary, or using unnecessary force when performing those duties. Also, placing the limbs of the individual in an unnatural or painful position. The definition of neglect, what we're looking at is, was there a failure to provide the protection, food, or shelter, or the care necessary to avoid emotional harm or physical injury? For paid and unpaid caretakers, that could be the failure to provide the protection, food, shelter, or care necessary to avoid emotional harm or physical injury, or the negligent act that caused or may have caused emotional harm, physical injury, or death. And of course, the majority of our reports do fall under the definition of neglect. And many times, as stated earlier about the actual victim being their own perpetrator, is what we define as self-neglect. It could be just the natural progression of aging. They're no longer able to provide their own self-care or help. So we see that that's probably the largest category of reports that we receive. Possible indicators of neglect, just by observation: malnutrition, dehydration, poor hygiene, maybe evidence of inadequate care, unsafe or unsanitary living conditions, lack of utilities, lack of basic necessities, or lack of needed equipment, meaning like durable medical equipment, possible adaptive aids necessary in the home. But these are just a few of the indicators that we're looking for. Financial exploitation, and we define that as the illegal or improper act of an alleged perpetrator who is using or attempting to use the resources of the alleged victim. And this could include the victim's social security number or other identifying information for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain without the informed consent of the alleged victim. When we're looking at financial exploitation by the numbers, there's an estimated loss from elder financial abuse that ranges from $2.9 billion to as high as $36 billion each year. 18% of the victims were 60 years and plus, and 60 plus years of the victims were more likely than any other age group to report the losses of 100,000 or more. 37% of fraud complaints were received by those 60 plus, and 17% were 70 years old or greater. The impact of financial exploitation can result in the loss of resources, loss of independence, increase in mental health issues, the inability to pay their own expenses, or the inability to replace lost assets through employment, or the inability to hire an attorney to pursue legal protections and remedies. Some of the indicators that we look for during the investigation, and also that are reported many times by either a family member, caretaker, is a possible sudden change in the bank account or banking practices, unexplained withdrawal of a lot of money by a person accompanying the alleged victim. And these are reports normally that we receive through the banks. Unapproved withdrawal of funds using an ATM card, or the unexplained missing funds or valuables. providing substandard care, unpaid bills despite having enough money, sudden appearance of a previously uninvolved relative claiming their rights to a person's affairs or possession, or providing unnecessary services. The importance of the collaborative efforts on our behalf is, again, as I stated before, not being a service providing agency, we are very dependent on our collaborative efforts in our communities to not only be our eyes and ears on reporting, but also to provide services. And we do collaborate so that we are able to obtain early recognition of any type of report. We do jointly investigate cases with the help of our community agencies. They assist us in aggressive intervention, prosecution, training personnel at financial institutions, community education. We work very frequently with multidisciplinary teams and resources for prevention. The laws that protect our vulnerable adults is APS, and that, again, that's Chapter 48 of the Human Resource Code that gives us the authority to do what we do. And of course, we work very closely with the police. And anytime we receive a report that fall under like sexual abuse, physical abuse, or exploitation, we do make a report to law enforcement. The importance of social supports and policy initiatives to address elder abuse. Of course, public transportation is a big thing that we depend on. Again, depending on the state that you're from, I know in Texas, public transportation for the elderly is lacking. And luckily, we have those that are lobbying and advocating for public transportation on that end. Of course, healthcare, law enforcement, our community agencies, our faith-based agencies, and our volunteer services all play a big role in addressing elder abuse. And of course, be a champion for older Texans and those with disabilities. What I want to do now is kind of lead off with questions. I know that a lot of people have questions pertaining to specific situations, and I'd like to get over to that to clarify. Again, this was just a basic overview of our agency and what we do. Of course, there's so much more involved. And so what I'd like to start off, I do see that we have a question, and stated years ago, I was informed that if the family refused to let you see or speak to the alleged victim at risk. I think what you're referring to here is the interference of an investigation. Yes, if there is a refusal of the family member to allow us to see the alleged victim, we will ask for law enforcement to assist because, and number one, we'll also report them to that individual to law enforcement for interference of the investigation. So if we're unable to make contact with the alleged victim due to the interference, we will ask law enforcement to go with us to the home and allow us to get in the home. The most famous question. I've made many reports that I've never received a phone call about. Why? I don't know why. It could be, and I hate to use this analogy, but with every organization, every business, you have your good apples and your bad apples. Policy does state that a phone call or contact must be made with the reporter. If you did not receive a follow-up phone call, I would contact, if you're here in Region 3, you can contact me and I can follow up, but you can call and find out who the caseworker is and who the supervisor is and find out what went on with the case, because many times the reporter can assist us in the investigation, but probably the situation here was that the report may not have been a valid report and it was closed. It was considered just an INR, meaning information and referral.
Lisa, could you explain for the people that don't know what counties are involved in Region 3?
Okay, Region 3 covers all the way east to Greenville, Sherman, going up north, Sherman, of course, Collin County, McKinney. We go up to Denton. We go out west to Mineral Wells, Weatherford, Parker County, on down through Stephenville, down to Corsicana, back up through Dallas. So it's 19, I mean, I don't have in front of me all the 19 counties, but if I'm not mistaken, Marty, I think it covers what you all cover on the east and what Donnie Green covers on the west.
Yes. So it would be the 16 counties we cover, which go out to Parker and Palo Pinto to the west.
Yes.
Wise, it goes south to Hood and Somerville.
Correct.
It goes to Johnson, Navarro, Erath County. It goes to Kaufman, Hunt, Dallas. It includes Rockwall, Denton, Collin, Grayson, Wise, and then one other to the, I believe it's one other to the east of Wise. I mean, after Grayson, is that right?
Yes, yes. We cover all those counties. So that we've got 19 counties. I think we have 3. I think we go a little bit further east than y'all do. If I'm maybe north.
I think it's our counties include, but it adds Dallas and Tarrant, and then Wise, Grayson, and then whatever Bonham's in. I can't remember what county that is.
Yeah, Bonham. Yeah.
Yeah, but Fannin. Thank you so much.
Fannin, yes.
Thank you, Megan. I don't have it in front of me. So if you have any questions about Region 3, let me know. And I'm sure there's a contact for the other regions as well, as if anyone has any questions. I just want to make sure we clarified that. You go right ahead. There's more questions in the Q&A, and starting at 10:21 in the chat, there's some questions.
Okay. Let's see, reports. What happens if others see exploit, but the alleged victim does not think? Okay, this is what many times, and this is where you hear, we called APS and they didn't do anything. Normally, if there's exploitation or suspected exploitation from an outside person through observation, and we conduct our investigation, and the client states that they don't think they're stealing or that they're being exploited, they have the right to say that, and we have to respect that. Now, many times in this situation, it's normally an adult child, and the alleged victim is unwilling to follow our service plan, such as if we think an adult child is exploiting their mom or dad, then we say, okay, let's remove their name off the account. Let's look at different power of attorney if they have power of attorney. And when the alleged victim says, I'm not willing to do that, that is their right. And that's when I talk about a victim being their own perpetrator. And in state of Texas, you have what we call the right to self-determination, and that means the right to make poor choices, regardless, as long as it does not put the health or safety of themselves or another individual at risk. That if they choose, that's where this comes in, they have the right to refuse our investigation or even our service plan. Had an ER case, insider clothing, UTA. The son took her home, and when APS told him that the mother says she did not want to talk to you, and the case was closed. Okay, it sounds like here that they were taken to a hospital, had massive UTA, roaches crawling under her wig. The son took her home. The mother says she didn't want to talk to us, and if there was no question of capacity, meaning that she was not incapacitated, then she can refuse our services. And I will say that as an agency and as investigators, it is imperative that we do not impose our own moral judgment on these situations. Not everybody lives like you or I would prefer. That may be a lifestyle, living in that type of environment that is common, but they have the right, even though we deem that, a safety hazard and inappropriate, if she says she doesn't want our help, then we have to step out. Next question, if the person is at risk, hang on a lot. If the person is at risk, self-neglect, beginning dementia, and refuses services, how does the APS caseworker determine they are appropriate for further assessment? For example, if it is reported that someone is living in an unsanitary and unsafe environment with evidence of rats, the person is neglecting good hygiene, would that give cause to request an evaluation? Yes, I mean, we're not going to conduct a capacity assessment until we started our investigation. Now, I will tell you that if any of y'all out there in the field know what it's like to try to get a capacity assessment, it is not taken lightly by any means. We have our own, if we can't get a capacity assessment through their own primary care physician, we do contract with physicians, LMSWs, and others to perform these. There's a difference between a cognitive decline, the person requires 24-hour supervision, versus this person is incapacitated and they do lack capacity, or they are deemed incompetent. Many doctors do not take that lightly, and they're not going to state that somebody is completely incapacitated unless they truly, through their assessment, makes that conclusion. Most of the time they will say this person needs 24-hour supervision. Well, that means that person still has capacity. With Adult Protective Services, in order for us to take protective custody, they must have been deemed incompetent / lacking capacity. Once we receive that capacity assessment, we have to take it before the court, before a judge, and the judge has to agree that this person lacks capacity and does need guardianship. So that, I mean, we don't make that decision. That is a decision made by the medical professional and the judiciary. These are very difficult cases, I will agree, but we do not have the authorization to take protective custody if we don't have a medical conclusion that that person lacks capacity.
Jennifer, yes, it does include Tarrant County. And I saw Denise, I saw that you raised your hand. If anybody has any questions or comments, please put them in the chat or Q&A. Because of the number of people on, we're not going to be opening up the mics.
Right.
Just because there's of the numbers we have on. So
yeah. Okay, and there's one more about the Employee Misconduct Registry. They handle a lot of complaints. The complaint, when you file a complaint, that is not through us. That is handled under Protective and Regulatory under HHSC. And they are the ones, they also oversee the Employee Misconduct Registry. So if you receive a complaint about a home provider, then you need to refer it to the investigative agency who handles the employee. Because once we validate on a paid caretaker, that is when we send it over to regulatory under HHSC. We don't personally place them on the EMR. It's a process that we refer over to.
Okay, I'm going to start reading some of the questions in the chat if I could.
Yes, please do.
Rebecca asks, if a disabled person does not feel safe in their apartment due to a neighbor consistently harassing them, can the disabled person make a report?
They can make a report, but depending on the type of harassment, it sounds, I mean, I would need to know what type of harassment. It may be just a basic call to law enforcement.
Melissa asks, when does APS cover the cost of nursing facility admissions?
The only time we cover that is if we take protective custody or deem that person cannot remain in the home temporarily. Say that, there's something going on in the home, and we want to try to return that individual to the home. We will pay for temporary skilled care. Now, if it's a situation where skilled care is the only option to ensure the health and safety of that individual, we will pay until we can get, okay, let me back up. If they would have to either private pay and depending on their basic eligibility for nursing home payment under Medicaid, we will assist in starting that process. But of course, they have to meet the criteria to meet the Medicaid eligibility requirements. If they're private pay, then the individual's required to pay their own skilled care. We only pay for during an emergency situation until we can vet through everything to, whether it's long-term skilled care or if it's, we're going to be returning them to the community.
Taryn asks, does APS cover bed bug treatment?
Good question. At times, first of all, we're going to find out, is the bed bug infestation based on the self-neglect of the client themselves or the victim themselves? Can that person remain in the home? And is the home safe for them to stay in? The reason we've clarified that definition is because everybody was calling us to come in and spray for bed bugs, and that's not what we do. If they have bed bugs, but they are not in a situation of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, no, we will not.
Okay, I'll ask, if an individual is 63 years old and is experiencing verbal abuse from her fiance, is that reportable?
Not unless she meets the definition of a substantial impairment.
Okay, Melissa asks, does APS underwrite the cost of alternative living housing in some circumstances?
No, we do not. We do not provide housing or pay for housing.
Okay. Kim asks, does APS provide help for hoarders?
Yes, we do. Now, of course, when we get a report on hoarding, part of the investigation and service planning is, number one, is this person going to continue to hoard? We're not just going to go in and clean up a hoarding case just for the sake of cleaning it up, because if the symptoms of the actual hoarding itself is not addressed, we do, part of our service plan is to get them in some type of counseling to address the hoarding issue. But again, we're looking at, the health and safety of the individual. There's a lot of times we've had to relocate a hoarder, and I hate to call them a hoarder, a person with a hoarding disability. They just start hoarding in their next living environment. So we are going to encompass all areas of the hoarding situation before we actually go in and pay for cleanup.
Okay, Pierre Gant, we won't tell anybody that you forgot your name. I'm just kidding. I know I'm not quite sure I understand where you forgot to put your name, but I'm just giving you a hard time, Pierre. Okay, I'm sorry, the next one, is it Nikisha? If a person declines to let you enter into the home to investigate, do you automatically close that case until the next report? And I think you kind of covered that.
No, well, it depends. Now, are you talking about the client refusing us? Or
if a person declines to let you enter into the home, yeah, that would be the question.
Okay, the alleged victim. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on the information we received on the report. So if there's any suspicion that this person is not letting us in and they lack capacity, or we feel that the reported situation is putting them at severe risk of harm, then again, we will go to the courts and ask for a court authorized entry. We don't, but we will have to go to the courts to request that.
Great. Norma asked, does your agency take care of guardianship process?
No, we do not oversee. We used to. Guardianship used to be under the Department of Family and Protective Services. And many of y'all that work out there in the community know that, every 5 or 6 years, they change the umbrella of how different agencies and who they're going to be under. but guardianship moved under HHSC, I want to say about 3 sessions, legislative sessions ago. We make the referral to guardianship. And once we've made the referral and they've accepted that referral, then we close the case on our end. We're no longer involved.
Great. That's a great update. Helen, I think we've already covered the bed bug issue. Gabriella asks, any transportation assistance besides VIA?
You're going to have to clarify what is VIA. I do know that we don't provide transportation. We can try to arrange it through MITS or something, but like I stated earlier, especially in Dallas and Tarrant County, or even our rural areas, transportation is severely lacking.
Okay. Helen asked a question, yes, and that is a huge issue. And I just remind you all, the only way that's going to get changed is that we all advocate for it. So you guys, we can't do that alone. You guys have to call your representatives, and you guys have to advocate them. I think it speaks best if you get your clients to also talk to them, but them seeing firsthand situations where people don't have transportation and they have a critical need are very effective in helping to advocate for those things. Helen asked, what happens if an elderly person who is self-neglect and lacking capacity, has no family, undocumented, and does not have any possibility to get Medicaid?
That's a sticky wicket, again, because if we're looking at alternative placement and they lack capacity, which means we have to refer them over to guardianship, that's one thing. But in order to get Medicaid, you know, they have their own rules and regulations and all of that. So that is an unfortunate situation that many times we are not able, unless we can get the consulate or somebody involved. Maybe if they're not here legally, you know, we may have to see if they go back to their own country and get the care they need. But yeah, I mean, you know, we have our rules and regulations, and Medicaid has theirs.
Megan, once again, thank you for your help with jogging our memory of Fannin County. We appreciate that. So Anna asks, where is the fine line when an individual becomes self-neglected, not taking care of themselves, of basic needs, and endangering his or her wellness, when the freedom of rights becomes, I guess the balance between them, the taking care of the issue and their freedom of rights. Where does that balance lie, or that fine line lie, when APS will get involved?
Capacity.
Okay.
Capacity is one of the driving factors on whether we violate an individual's right to self-determination. Let's put it that way.
Great. Well, I think we've covered all of the questions that anybody has. It's if anybody has any questions, if you'll quickly put them in the chat, or any other questions, or in the Q&A. And while we're doing that, Lisa, is there something else you want to say? Because once you're done, I'm going to go to CEUs and talk about CEUs, but go ahead. I want to see if you have anything you want to add.
One thing I do want to add is that World Elder Abuse Awareness Day is June 15th, if y'all were not aware of that. This is a worldwide event in which we bring attention to elder abuse. And for those of you that would like to honor it, you could certainly wear purple on the 15th. We as an agency do a lot of, I know here in our area, we're having the downtown lights in Dallas and Tarrant turn purple. So we've got some of the, like Sundance Square, turning their lights purple on the 15th. They're building lights in Arlington. They're taking all their city monument lighting, turning it purple. But it, you know, it's a big deal. It is just now becoming on the forefront. And so on the 15th, if you'd like to wear purple in recognition to World Elder Abuse Day, we would certainly appreciate it. Other than that, I'm not sure if I have anything else to add unless there's any more questions.
The only thing I would add to that is that you guys, once again, anything that's lacking here, not only transportation, but any other services, you know, we got to advocate for it. You got to keep reminding you, we've got to advocate for the additional things we need, for the changes we need. And that's not telling us to advocate for it. That's us all advocating for it, because it takes every one of us to make that happen. If we can go on to the next slide, that's great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go back over of the CEUs and the certificate of attendance for those of you that weren't on right at the beginning. Today, you're eligible for CEU certificates for a licensed social workers or licensed professional counselors in the state of Texas. We've had people take those CEUs and use them for other licenses in Texas or for licenses outside of Texas, but that's at the discretion of your jurisdiction. There's no guarantee. The only thing I know we're set up with is for social workers and licensed professional counselors in Texas for today's webinar. A certificate of attendance is also available if you'd like that. The requirements are the same for both. It's good for 1 classroom hour. You must have completed the entire webinar, not miss more than 5 to 10 minutes of the webinar. You must complete the Google survey. The evaluation should pop up as you close out today from Zoom. I know some companies have pop-up blockers that won't allow those. For that reason, we will also send out the link to the survey in my first follow-up email that will go out later today. And you can do it there. I know some people have even had a hard time getting, because of their company's blocks, getting those links to open up. But I just suggest that you forward it to your personal email and open up there if you can't get it to open in your company. But you do have to fill out the survey. The survey will be up and live for 1 week till 5:00 p.m. on the 9th. And the certificates should all be sent out to you by the 16th. Any questions about that, you can send me an email, but that's where we are with CEUs. And then if we can go to the last slide, please.
Yes, that's
okay. Our next webinar is going to be identifying and engaging with autism, persons with autism spectrum disorder on June 8th. Please join us for that. I appreciate it. And I know someone's talked about transportation speakers. I'm looking here for alternative forms of public transportation. Okay, I think we've gotten pretty much all of the questions answered.
Marty, I'm going to include, I thought I had my phone number here, especially for those here in Texas, because I would be your contact if, you know, if you've made a report and maybe we're not thrilled at how things were handled, maybe there's a situation that we can talk about, or if you're suspecting it and you're not sure whether it's reportable or not, you can call me. So I'm going to list my phone number here just so that you have it.
Okay, great.
And I'm going to list my email address.
Very good. So are you putting that in the chat? Is that what you're putting it?
Yes.
Okay, great. It has not showed up. Oh, there you go. Perfect. Oh, you know what? I'll copy it over. It just went to the host and the panelist. I'll copy it over.
Oh, okay, okay.
Send it to everybody. It's not a problem. Let me just copy it real quick before I want everybody to have a chance to see that before they log out. So here, to everyone. Great. There it is, everyone. Lisa's phone number. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lisa. Lisa, thank you so much for today. It was really incredibly valuable information. It was great. We certainly appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. Again, if there's any other questions you may have as individuals pertaining to a specific case, please feel free to email me or call me, and I will be happy to assist you in any way possible.
Yeah, and if you need information on what the other regions are or what region your county's in, let us know. Maybe what I'll do, is there a region map that you might be able to send me a link to
Yes, I will send that to you.
And then I'll include that region, a link to the regional map in the follow-up email I send out to everyone. So if you're not sure what region your county's in, you can just look at the map.
Yeah.
Perfect. Lisa, thank you so very much, y'all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Day.
Okay, y'all have a good day.
Thank you.